So tonight we're here to welcome back Sidney Lee to read from his brand new collection of poems called Here. Now I have to say it was hard to promote here because we do things all over the Upper Valley, and people thought that I was saying that Sid Lee was going to be here with here was just too confusing, and anyway, interesting title. So Sid Lee has quite a resume behind him. He graduated from Yale, where he is taught, in addition to a long list of other prestigious institutions, including Dartmouth, Wesleyan, Vermont, and Middlebury colleges, and he's done some international stints in both Switzerland and Hungary. And in 1977, he founded the New England Review, which he edited until '89. And another big recognition was that in 2001, his collection of poems, Pursuit of a Wound, was one of the 3 finalists for the Pulitzer Prize. He acted as the Poet Laureate of Vermont from 2011 to 2015, and has been recipient of fellowships from the Rockefeller, Fulbright, and Guggenheim Foundations, and the list is way too long, it would take all night. So in addition to his 13 collections of poems, he has written 7 books of essays, which we have some of them up front. Most recently, Growing Old in Poetry, and he edited, along with Charles Nord, the most recent past Poet Laureate of Vermont, a wonderful collection called Roads Taken of contemporary Vermont poets. He lives in Newbury and is active in literary efforts and in conservation. And I've read this quote in a couple places, and I don't know who I can attribute it to, but the quote is, "A man in the woods," Sid is, "a man in the woods with his head full of books, and a man in books with his head full of woods." It seems very apt. So without further ado, help me welcome Sid Lee.
Thank you, Liza. I'm glad to be in what is literally my favorite bookstore in Vermont. I was reminded by that quotation of something that my late friend Bill Matthews said about me, was that most of my poems could be summarized by a line from the Teddy Bear's Picnic. If you go down to the woods today, you're in for a big surprise. I'll say a little something prefatory about this collection. In 2016, rather to my surprise, I had a heart attack. I had been training to do this annual flatwater kayak race that I involve in, and I must say do pretty well in. And I had this little pinch, and if it hadn't been for the fact that all my male predecessors died before they were 60, I probably wouldn't. Well, in all fairness, if it hadn't been for my wife, I probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. So when I went down and they told me that I was having a heart attack, I thought, well, that can't be, because I didn't have any shortness of breath or dizziness or anything like that. I thought, that's something that happens to other people, it's not me. Anyway, when I went to put this book together, I realized, without for a moment pretending that I am some kind of a poetic prophet or something like that, I was struck by the fact that so many of the poems that I wrote had to do with physical presence, with here-ness. And once this event happened, and I rode down to Eastern Maine Medical Center in Bangor, Maine, and we were at a camp up in Maine, and got a stent put in. Everything's been pretty good since. But thereafter, I wrote with what Samuel Johnson once said about, he said, "The prospect of the gallows concentrates the mind wonderfully." And I sort of looked at the world perhaps more closely than I had before. So there was a very conscious notion after that particular event, the poems that succeeded August 21st, 2016, of here-ness, but with here-ness on steroids, if you know what I mean. So that explains the title, and maybe some other things will be evident as I read along.
I need to adjust the mic a little bit. I can't hear it all in the back.
Yeah, you've got to be closer to it.
That is to
Now, without knocking your teeth out.
Okay, how's that?
Is that better?
That better?
Thank you.
After 40 years, there's really nothing that can't be improved. It's a work in progress. How come you always say you like me the way I am? Yeah. Here's the first poem in the book. It's called Here at Summer's End. That birds have largely quieted my distresses, and like neglected mail, the garden's lettuce went yellow weeks back and simply dissolved. But we ought to pause before we focus on loss in a season still teeming with vegetation. No matter the month, our sense of wonder remains, unless we will it to leave. Even now the mercury flirts with 85, so it's wondrous, say, how starlings decide to convene for migration. We can watch their flocks in the roadbeds. It's a marvel as well, whatever the force is that's already started to blanch the legs of the snowshoe hares. Our longing is always for now to endure. Though since the dawn of thinking, many a thinker has found death an engine of beauty. Truth is, however, our world will never go dead. Those heads of lettuce have fused with humus below, and after those starlings wing off, the juncos and titmice will show. And the ghostly hares of winter won't be ghosts at all, but creatures with dark flesh packed onto bone under ivory hides. Coyotes will hunt them to keep alive through the ineluctable, I almost said awful, chill. And even then, the ice beads on softwood boughs may look, if we want, like permitted fruit. As the season nears, or lingers, or ends, an amplitude can tell us we still are subject to spells. We're here, after all. Let's chant it throughout the year like so much birdsong. We're here, we're here, we're here, we're here. I came with an ace of being born in Alabama, lately ravaged by hurricanes, as you may remember. That was a joke. That was the Sharpie one. Remember? Anyway, in the segregated army in World War II, my father was in charge of a company of so-called colored troops, and they were stationed in Gadsden, Alabama, largely illiterate young men who'd never been to a school or whatever, and they went over to Wales from Gadsden, Alabama, to Normandy. And I would have been born there if a certain incident hadn't occurred, which I will read about in this poem called The Owl and I. Once the Jim Crack cross got burned on our lawn, my mother took off back north to have me. My father was stationed in Gadsden, Alabama before the Second Great War, commander of so-called colored troops. And he had invited a few of his men inside the house, it seems. A radical thing indeed just then in the heart of Jim Crow Dixie. So my mother escapes giving birth down there, though I don't have any idea why I'd think of this, which, near to her death, she spoke of so many years after. Why now, on watching a barred owl glide through a hemlock gone dark at sundown, everything as well going dark around me here where I stand. Once, at midnight, she thought she had heard a whoop of human anguish and wondered whether some soldier were being lynched outside. My father went out for a look but found nothing. My lifelong relations with my mother were vexed, I now suspect, in part because between us two stood a lot in common. The Jews were being crammed into cattle cars then, but for Dad and those troops, the evil in Europe lay several months ahead. Still, real or imagined, the cry of mortal misery stuck with Mother, though no signs of nearby violence turned up next morning. The company came en masse to mess, shit on a shingle as the GIs shed dried beef on toast. So life went on, at least for a while, more or less. It ought to bring comfort that I'm where I am, aging but safe, my kin constantly swelling as sons and daughters produce their own sons and daughters, and winter so harsh this year giving way at last to spring, with snowdrops glinting, the freshets making their evanescent cascades through the woods. I recall how my mother loved this season. why then this lonely sensation? It feels that I'm in some pitch-black tunnel and won't get out again, that this, as the saying goes, is it, that all I'll have at the end, of course there can't be anything to it, is the sorrowful 8-note anthem of that single owl, the sound just now having reached my vexed old head, though I'd be foolish to think that song was addressed to anyone human. When I was a boy, I was raised in the suburbs, but my bachelor uncle had a farm to which I retreated as frequently as I possibly could. Spent all summer there and all school holidays. And he had this big old cellar, mostly, a little of it was concrete, but most of it was dirt, and it went back into little corners, and there was a sound from one of them that always amazed me and kind of attracted me and terrified me. I didn't know what it was. I think now it was an ancient water pump, but it sounded like some kind of animal in there, And I go down every time I'd go up there, and I'd go down to the end of the cellar, and I'd sort of walk toward it, but then I come back upstairs. This is called Interior. It's for a man named Marian Strojan, who's my Slovene translator and become a really dear friend. And I kind of took off on this poem when he started talking about a similar experience. He was raised on an actual farm in eastern Slovenia. Interior. Some oddities can settle forever within a mind. I think of a noise in my bachelor uncle's cellar in the unimaginable deepest part where gravel gave way to dirt. First, an almost inaudible whining, and then an awful, protracted wheeze, as if some strange animal were fighting in the gloom to gather its share of air. I'd make myself stand right there by the steps to listen every visit. Not that I ever dared to walk across to that recess, hidden and dark, no darker than any dark. My flashlight's puny arc played on the mouth of what seemed a cavern, the beast inside, now a wolverine, now something vaguely like a lion, or a scaly dragon from the picture books by my bed upstairs in the nook. I still can make my own grim cave in thought where hordes of monsters crouch that could carry my family off. My ears have tinnitus and constant ringing, which somehow recalls the breathing of that dreadful thing, that gruesome sound. I all but see the enormous snake that waits for someone alone like me. The bird flu, SARS, Ebola, all can be bears or bulls or outsized scorpions, jackals and packs. And I doubt I'll ever fathom why one of those picture books, the one with its clan of peaceful gorillas, should with each reading have thrilled me and frightened me so. Above all, the mother ape's last words to her infants at evening, "Some oddities live forever." Sleep, she told them, don't suck your toes, which meant the dark was coming. I spent a lot of time in the last 20 years, I guess, in Eastern Europe and made some good friends over there. I've made friends with a man I think is one of the world's great poets named Goran Simic. He spells it the same as Charlie Simic. And now he's from Sarajevo, and during the unpleasantness, he was getting it from every side because he was a Bosnian Serb in Sarajevo married to a Muslim woman. That everybody hated him, and his brother was shot right next to him as they were walking down the street by a sniper, and they don't know from what side the sniper came. At any rate, this is a poem for him called No Consequence. A red-tail shot from nowhere and killed one of the two black ducklings without the least effort as I canoed a mirror lake at dawn. When the small bird disappeared, the hen rushed to shield the last of her brood. Urgent as my own mind, which rushed by habit to metaphor, and by dint of will alone stopped shy of the lousy poet's oh, for all the sad creatures, I paddled on. So did the two that survived. They fossicked again for surface insects, the mother settled her feathers, the world went ahead with its usual business. And I thought of my Bosnian friend how he opts for a sturdy manner. He tells good jokes in the bastard English he learned from American comic books and talk behind the translation of television sitcom soundtracks. He moves on, in spite of all. That poor doomed duckling's wisps of down floated in the air like snowflakes, diaphanous after the raptor snatched it, beautiful, backlit by sun. I recall that hawk as a totem of splendor, while it managed its own savage business, even as the pitiable rasps and squalls of the grown duck likewise linger, indelible in the brain. And so I may just write of them soon, though I think how my friend beheld the brain of a better friend splayed against the wall in a town so picturesque it all but beggars the mind. Oh, I'm a poet of no consequence. The sniper picked one of two who walked the quaint old street together. I feel guilt, not envy. It's true. I'm content enough in life to be so wanting in subject matter. I'm expected to write down the page number of. These people that show up and don't know where the hell they are, they should really be. I may just have to skip this so I don't find it really quickly. All right, well. The heck with it. I can't find it. There's a poem called Fire and Jewel.
What were you looking for?
News Come Third is the one I'm looking for. This poem is called
29.
Why Else Would You Marry a Young Lawyer? News Comes Third. Oh, these guilty pleasures, if that's what I really should call them. I buy the local paper and my usual cup of store coffee, then drive back home and sit, ignoring whatever may be transpiring outside the window. Squall of the spring tom turkey calling his hens, the contrails of planes on their way to Europe, Tokyo, Rio, Paris, who cares? I sip from the cup and turn first thing to letters, primarily to see just what might annoy me today. If it's someone fussing over an issue like water rates in a small town near or far, whose fortune or misfortune I have no personal stake in, I go right ahead to the sport. I check how my teams are doing. That is, if I haven't spent the preceding evening's hours watching games on TV, what the hell, I'm retired, leave me alone. My wife was right upstairs, likely watching stuff of her own, like some period thing from Great Britain, which would blow me to sleep in an instant. No, give me 2 on and 2 out in the bottom of the ninth, an impossible game-clinching shot in overtime, a field goal from 50 yards out. I don't care if some lady whines in her letter how the clerk in the local shop, when she asked him for help, said, "Forget it, I'm busy." The woman claims that people were kinder once. But I bet that complaint was heard when people still lived in caves. Don't tell me my wife and I should hone our communication. We know each other like twins. We've been lovers for 4 decades. Can you tell me you're doing better? A train shakes the valley each morning while I'm feeding my sports addiction. I don't mind that sound far away. News comes third, and it seems these days it's always a mess. There I go, sounding myself like that woman I just made fun of. Another exotic disease, another IED, a register man shot dead by someone less nice than the lady upset by a rude clerk's behavior. I go back and skim through recaps. Never mind if I've seen the game, above all one that we've won. For me to say we is absurd, and don't think I don't know it. I'm sure there's not one player who'd give me the time of day. Though I've never met her, I don't like to think of that letter writer, because I'll start making a picture of her. Her husband dead in the Gulf, her kids all disappointments or worse, or drugs, or in jail, or both. She stares through tears out her shitbox apartment window while I read such letters and fume or check the stats in the box scores. I keep my eyes off the photos that go with the news, which comes third. How did you find that? It's like, I think there is a disease called male refrigerator blindness. Many of you women are aware of that. And I will look and look and look and see, where is the whatever? It's right there. Where is the poem? It's right there. Page, whatever it was. I've already forgotten. Fire and Jewel. 80-foot hemlock, spruce, fir, pine, they kept lifting off their stumps like so many rockets, smoke trails and all. And I beheld the fire cross lake from where I drifted. I'd been plumbing the water for fish when my eyes were lifted, and 50 years later I still recall my thoughts, and how I felt that to think them was more than odd. I was glad I had faculties to behold the hill's astonishing orange heat as it flared to white with each explosion. Then the whole of the conflagration, bending toward earth, a horizontal wall, a monolith that somehow tore downhill in the sudden fury of wind. It was gorgeous. Several hours would go by till I learned Earl Bailey was forced to fly as quickly as he could on his dozer down from the ridge right into Farm Cove. He just had to take the loss. It was that or burn. Donald Chambers, wielding an axe, in his turn with a makeshift crew, collapsed from labor and heat. Paul, the storekeeper, dragged him away. I knew Don, sadly, just a few more years. He and Earl and Paul, good, honest men. I can't account for dreams like the one last night when I watched that fire again, and what seemed again pure quiet, serene, the same jetliner as years ago crossed high, the same scent rose, torch needles, caustic smoke. The same evil roar came on as I rocked in the same canoe, the waves still slapping its hull. In an hour, 5 decades back, the length of that ridgeline turned the color of onyx. The latest of my wife's birthdays will soon be upon us. Is that why the dream passed smoothly into the next one? I saw precisely a beautiful onyx stone hung on her breast from a slip of chain. I'd never dreamt such a woman as that hillside blackened. Wouldn't meet her for years. Today, I drove to a jewelry shop as if still dreaming. 300 miles to the west of that little mountain, I bought the necklace and felt some fire in my being, mild version of one that kindled in that old autumn, and which has, for a long time, underground, kept burning. That poem refers to a part of Maine that means a lot to me and my wife. I've been going there since I was 9. That's longer ago than I like to acknowledge, and I was blessed to know men and women of a generation, and we'll never see their like again, who were born there and worked there before there were any power tools. One of them, a spectacular one, was a man named Earl Bonus, who was one of those river drivers who rode the logs from Back Lake down to the ocean every April. Risky business, but they were all marvelous storytellers because they had no other means of entertainment. They had to entertain one another. So some men and some women were better than others. There was one that we loved to death named Annie Fitch, and this is called Annie's Duck Sauce. I must be prepared to sit for hours, and for me that's fine. We will speak heart to heart or just chat. The main ingredient's time. Because Annie's 89 when she tells me how I should mix some molasses, spices, soda, duck drippings, and orange zest. Some of her part of the talk concerns elders, needless to say, whom she often recalls with humor, but as often with elegy. She too was going away as I summoned the recipe. And yet she appears as the minutes crawl and the fixings seethe, redolent, dark as tea. Her uncle George MacArthur made railroad ties with an axe. Her father, Franklin, skippered the venerable steamboat Robert S. Once ice had broken, she towed great booms to the river. Then men drove the logs to the ocean. The pan, cast iron, old-fashioned as one Annie handed to me no more than a few months after her brother passed away. That brother and I crouched to wait for the ducks of a favorite slough. We never told anyone which. We haunted the place, we two. But I was speaking before of Annie, who, as I listened, seemed almost a force of nature, optimistic, insistent on the good in any person, and the meanest one in existence, or the saddest situation. At last, the sauce is thickened. These days, dear Annie's a figment. She's gone too. She isn't here to test the spice in the mixture, which causes my eyes to water. I could have listened all year. And with your permission, I'm going to read a lot of these poems are kind of old to me. I want to read a couple of newer ones. Let's see. I'll read one shortly that will indicate that in real life I'm actually lots of fun. This one is called Photographs, 1949. In one, they pose both grinning straight at the Kodak. The backyard elm not yet blighted to death at their backs. It's years since either parent was alive. How did it happen? I'm suddenly 75. We live our lives, Psalm 90 says, as a tale that is told. From where I stand, that's all too real. What startles me is the fact that the tale's so short. An instant, it seems, to this moment from back at its start. With what I've known, you'd think there'd be chapter on chapter. 5 children, all those grandsons, those granddaughters. And indeed, I could go on about each one. But on and on feels no longer what it's been. My friends, of course, are more or less my age. We tend to think this way. It's near cliche. I have another photograph on my dresser. My father alone in that one. He stands by water that sluggishly slides by our cabin in Sumneytown. I don't know how to explain why I can't be found in the shot. After all, the bucket at his feet is full of sunfish I've plucked from that very creek. Or is it? Like anyone else, I tell myself stories. Maybe my claims no more than imaginary, which makes it, for me at least, not a bit less true. The fish are green and orange, their lips are blue. I feel the sun as it caroms off streamside boulders. I can whiff the swamp nearby where algae molder. Who dwells in our old house these days? Search me. What room was mine? Who recalls the ghost elm tree? The grass in the uphill meadow has gone brown as ever. Not one pumpkin seed fish in the pail still gasps or quivers. Who visits the cabin? Who hooks little fish in the water? My father stands there beaming beside my treasures. I shouldn't be, and yet somehow I'm stunned. Even the fish, though dead in the photo, are young. Assumptions and cullings. I sometimes come on headstones in backwoods graveyards, girt by their own shallow graves the size of bathtubs, and by brush through which each one juts valiantly upward. Lately, whenever I take to my local river, small cavities in either side's high sand tiers look empty to me, as those graves must be by now. Once there were hundreds on hundreds of bank swallows there, darting jauntily out of those minuscule layers to harvest the mayflies that rose from the silty stream bed toward the sun like bright, diminutive angels. Now I find it lucky, a word too poor for what's sacred, to behold one or two of the birds, athletic, winged, wonders under dawn or twilight skies. Myriad assumption, myriad cullings. One tradition tells us our spirits will rise, before which, however, a winnowing's required. How odd to imagine that such an idea might comfort. The men and women beneath those knife-thin stones, the vanished wildfowl, to me, of course, pure strangers. Yet I feel the haunts of aerial things. They hover over my frail boat, as I remember and mourn. All Hallows Eve, a little bit after the fact, but I hollow my body out before bed. Contacts, partial denture, hearing aids, blurry-eyed, gap tooth, aching and hard of hearing. Again, I thank an unnameable something for what I have. However dim in my sight it may be, the water in our pond downhill still reaps the burnish of the rough-edged moon that winks through the same old window tree. Remarkably like a pack of dogs, between the ridges that make a frame for our same old house, the barred owls yammer. Downstairs are 3 real dogs snuff and twitch and dream. One child's out west, and how I pray she doesn't love it. I love her and the other 6 who live nearby. No doubt they're children, trick or treat. At last, before I lay me down, I attempt some reassembly. 2 wrist braces for carpal tunnel, collar pillows, CPAP mask, lest tonight be the one when I breathe my last. Like a jack-o'-lantern, that ghostly creature grins ear to ear in the dresser mirror. Some time ago, I had the local minister in Newbury is a wonderful woman, Susan Tarantino. She's, alas, left and going elsewhere. But she came to me and said that there's a old folks home, retirement home in our town called the Atkinson. Called the Atkinson home, and biology being what it is, there were like 28 women there and 2 old men, 3 old men. And she said, if you want to do a nice thing, you would go call on some of these men because they don't have much company except one another. So one of them was really, he was, I don't know what had happened to him. It almost seemed like a PTSD thing. He didn't want to talk to anybody, just stayed in his room. Sometimes didn't even come down to eat for days. And so he was kind of a lost cause. And then there were 2 others. And they were so different from one another. One was a very well-educated man. And the other, I thought might be a little slow somehow. I found out that was not the case, and he liked me to go to the library and bring him books, especially books about ships. But he was insistent that they not be those metal ships, wooden ships. And I think I divined the reason for that. This is called The Seafarer. There's an old Anglo-Saxon poem called The Seafarer, and it's got that Anglo-Saxon kind of a hump in the middle of the line, which I echo in the construction of this poem. The Seafarer, on the anniversary of my father's death. Technically, Marcus drowned in the fluid that flooded his lungs. So I heard from a friend, his nurse. She told me he'd never wed, so no wife, no child. Except for that nurse, he died alone. Then some lawyer called describing how Marcus had been as a kid. Normal until they yanked his tonsils out. The ether in overdose drenched his brain. 8 years old, too late. My friend grasped why his words came like sounds from underwater. Why for Marcus the rules of bingo were so hard to navigate. His nurse had wrongly imagined the man retarded or challenged, to use her euphemism. Whatever you'd call it, he met his problem head on. He worked for years at a bake shop in Boston, then drifted north seeking harbor, which, given his case, turned out to be our local church home. The town librarian here brought him books. He liked to read about boats, but wood ones only, not those messes made of metal. His yen for old ships must have squared with what my friend later learned of his father's career in the Navy, which ended when storms swept him off a cold steel deck to a grave in the ocean. He wore a look at times that puzzled the staff, though they came to recognize it, tears coming in virtual waves from his anxious eyes. And what, to witness that sort of grief, did the medical people imagine? Having nothing but their descriptions, I conjure young Marcus myself. He brushes the flour from his hands and walks a few blocks to the bay, where he gazes at ships in the distance, the new metal kind, no doubt. I picture him as he scans the prospect, squinting to make bright spars and planks appear, along with windlass and capstan, and himself standing tall at a tiller. A fatherland's out there somewhere. Calm and intent he steers toward what he's construed from books or his own inner visions. However, something in me is looking for a similar hint at redemption. I didn't really know Marcus. This is second-hand elegy, so I know it's only presumption to make of him a steersman, as if such longing belonged to him alone, not me. Read two more. I think, when I realized that I couldn't run anymore, that verb, I'm embarrassed to say it in front of somebody like Don Metz who really ran. I mean, I use it very loosely, but I couldn't do it anymore. My knees, since replaced, wouldn't take it. So I like to row, but once I was, and I still do, but I kind of jumped the gun one April right after ice was out, and in a scull you're facing behind you, and I ran into a log, and that was a really cold dip. So I bought a kind of entry-level kayak, and I've kept going up to one that I now use, which, as one of the locals up in Maine says, turns over if you change your mind. At any rate, but when I'm not down on the Connecticut River, which I live as close to as you do right here, sometimes my wife and I go for a more sane paddle, shall I say. This poem is called My Wife's Back. All naked but for a strap, it traps my gaze as we paddle. The dear familiar nubs of spine bone punctuating the sun-warmed swath. The slender muscles that trouble the same sweet surface. We've watched and smiled as the green herons flushed and hopped ahead at every bend, and we've looked up at a red-tail tracing open script on the sky, so clear and deep we might believe it's autumn, no matter it's August still. Another fall will be on us before we know it. Of course, we adore that commotion of color, but it seems to come again as soon as it's gone away. They all do now. My love for you over 40 years extends in all directions, but just now to your back as we drift and paddle down the tranquil Connecticut River. We've seen a mink scratch fleas out on a mudflat. We've seen an osprey start to dive, but seeing us think better of it. Two phoebes wagged on an ash limb. Your torso is long. I can't see your legs, but they're longer, I know. Phoebe, osprey, heron, hawk. Marvels under Black Mountain, but I'm fixed on your back, indifferent to other wonders. Bright minnows that flared in the shallows, the gleam off that poor mink's coat, even the fleas in its fur, the various birds, the lust of creatures, just to survive. But I watched your back. Never have I wished more not to die. And then the final poem is called Here Itself. And it has a epigraph from the Eastern Maine Medical Center Patients Report, 8/21/2016. A luting stent placed in occluded right coronary artery of otherwise fit and pleasant 73-year-old male. My former poet laureate of Vermont. My wife wanted me to edit out the pleasant part, but I've retained it. I had a heart attack is something I kept on thinking one hears from others. In search of dazzling revelation, I'd wandered blind through the world, had begun to see as much. Having approached Paul's barbershop, for instance, down the same asphalt alley in the same old hard-scrabble hamlet, and through the same old waiting room with those copies unchanging of Guns and Ammo, Popular Mechanics, what have you, I contemplated the ancient jug of Lucky Tiger, Paul's horseshoe pitching trophies, the snapshot curling around its tacks of the 350-pound bear at his feeder, and Paul and myself right there in the mirror, as ever. It's 30 years and more he's been cutting my hair as it's dwindled. 3 full decades of identical questions when he's nearing the finish. What a dry. Shall I do the eyebrows? A little more off the top? Trim the ears? Of course he knows the answers. It's the right is all, and the very comfort. Wonder lies in minuscule things. I'm here. There's a tough late solitary dahlia in our flower garden. A hooded merganser drake is grating like a rusted hinge from our pond. I notice these things as it seems to me I haven't before. I felt no fear, just wistfulness for wife, children, grandchildren, friends. I had a dress rehearsal for death, but no terror. Strapped to a gurney, I went off to visit the wonderful isness of was. The isness of forever. An Indian summer paddle trip on my beloved Connecticut River. Reflected below, crows cross the water to disappear behind a scrim of yellow leaves. Cottonwood, silver maple. I can't quite describe it, but I'm here to see it. I push through the windrows of lustrous fall foliage on the surface. There, above the village steeple, a cloud resembling nothing, only itself. Not chastity, not purity, not cotton, whipped cream. Itself. Who'd want it other? I'm here to see it. Itself. Entire. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure enough, thank you.
So, we're gonna, do you have time for question and answer, or do you want? to just
I got time. You got the keys.
Are there any questions or comments? Or
Paul.
Yeah, you have such a distinctive voice when you're reading your poetry, and when I read your poems, I hear you, loud and clear, basically.
Left banal.
Yeah. Do you read your poems out loud when you're writing them, or is it all internal?
I used to more than I do now. I don't know. How about you, Cleopatra? Or Pamela? I don't necessarily read them aloud anymore, but I kind of think I can hear myself, if you know what I mean. I do like to read new poems often in readings because I realize I've learned that if I read new poems and I get to a part that I'm kind of racing through or dropping my voice, that's an indication to me when I get home there's some more work to do. And I don't think I'd notice that. I wouldn't get as self-conscious about that if it were only I and nobody else around. So. John?
Marvelous book. I'm interested to know if your writing process has changed over the years, and if so, how has it changed?
Well, yes and no. I mean, when I started, I was kind of a late bloomer at this poetry. I didn't publish my first poetry book till I was 40. I was kind of misguided into a more purely academic course. And so when I started, I'd never taken a writing course. They didn't have them at my college, and let alone an MFA. So I just wrote. I scheduled all my classes to be late afternoon and evening, and I just worked hard every day. Whether I was writing well or not, I just made myself write for 3 hours. So I thought I had a lot of lost time to make up for. So I was almost religious in my devotion to that schedule, and I'm not anymore. That's changed. But in terms of what goes into a composition, I never know. It's just some little. I never have what they call an idea when I start. If I do, it's not going to be a good poem. I know that. I remember there's a story, which I hope is true, about W.H. Auden, where a student came to him, a young man, and said, "I have a marvelous idea for a poem." And he said, "I'm so sorry to hear that." Because for me, the pleasure of writing poetry is sort of discovering what I didn't know what was on my mind. Not something I already knew. That's kind of like the problem with political poetry, is I already know what my politics are, and I'm not discovering anything in the process of writing about them. Much better to write a letter to the editor, which is kind of a hobby of mine. Some of you may know. That's the next thing I'll be. if we were closer to the road, I'd be yelling at kids to get off the lawn, I suppose. But I sublimate that by writing letters to the editor. Pamela.
You know, Sid, in regard to what you were saying about the fuzziness of ideas, one of the most valuable things you ever taught me was, in response to one of my poems, was get the specific gravity of the thing and the moment, and all the rest will follow. It's just been so true.
Well, thank you. You've mentioned that before. And I was thrown out every science course I ever took, so I don't really know what specific gravity means. But I'm glad it was helpful. Any others?
So when you talk about your 3 hours of writing, I've heard about getting up and writing with the deep, doing the deep work first. I mean, do you have a schedule like that where you get to it right?
I really don't anymore. I used to have this superstition that if I did anything else before I wrote, that I wouldn't be able to write at all. And I think that may have been true at some point in my life. But now I just kind of have faith that, I'm going to do it. And when I do it, it's not, I'm not as compulsive about it. But I know that there's a novelist, and one doesn't hear much about her anymore, but I thought was really wonderful. A novelist named Mary Lee Settle. I don't know if any of you know her, but I remember her telling me at Breadloaf, I think it was. She said, do your what we would now say, your left brain. It takes one of them not to remember which is which, but do the logical. I think that's the left brain stuff after you've done the other stuff, because you want to keep the associative. Sort of intuitive side of your brain sharp before you dull it with something else, balancing the checkbook or going grocery shopping or whatever it may be. And I attended to that. I took that advice. Donald.
Did the heart attack event change how you looked at your work from then on?
Well, let me think about that. You think? I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I think that I was more attentive to specific gravity, whatever the hell that means. I mean, as I sort of said in that Barbara poem, I remember sitting in that chair. That's the first haircut I'd had. This old boy and I mean, he's kind of a friend. You know what I mean? You people have friends like that. I don't know a whole lot about him, but he recently had his own heart attack, about his 65th one. He's 89. And I really missed him, I was really concerned. But I remember sitting down in the chair and looking in the mirror with the apron over me and him behind me, as usual, and looking, and I said, I'm still here, and I just took it was just such a rush, It wouldn't excite a lot of people. I certainly wouldn't, it wouldn't have excited me at 17, I can tell you that. But a lot of things at 17 wouldn't have excited me, like having grandchildren and stuff like that. But so I don't think it's, I mean, I think, what's that wonderful poem by Wilbur called The Writer, where he hears his daughter upstairs in a room typing away, and he listens to her and he imagines her up there, and he says, I wish for you what I wished before, but harder. I think that's maybe the change.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.